Humiliation has a sound. The dry sound of suppressed laughter, of whispered voices when you enter a room, of the keyboard that stops typing the moment your shadow crosses the door. I remember exactly the day I first noticed that sound. It was an ordinary Monday, and the coffee in the break room was still hot. The smell of freshly baked bread mingled with the cheap perfume someone had overused. I straightened my simple blouse, applied lipstick in the reflection of the kettle, and smiled, trying to believe it would be a good day. But in that office, smiles like mine had an expiration date. I worked at that company for 23 years. I joined young, full of dreams, and determined to prove that competence has no color or age. But time passes, and the brilliance of a black woman's competence ages differently in the eyes of others. Suddenly, the same firm voice they once praised begins to grate. The experiment turns into stubbornness. Leadership becomes the hard way, and respect turns into silence. That's how it began, not with shouting but with absences, the glances, the uninvited meetings, the purposely forgotten emails, and worst of all, the veiled laughter when I made the slightest mistake. It was like walking on a glass floor, knowing the first crack wouldn't come from the weight of the mistake, but from the pleasure of those waiting to see me fall. I pretended not to notice. I pretended so much that I almost convinced myself everything was fine. But no one survives long pretending not to bleed. The first blow came disguised as praise. The new manager, white, young, arrogant, said I was an example of overcoming adversity, in that sweet tone that hides venom. The room laughed and I laughed too, but inside something burned. 'Cause I knew what he meant, that I was there only by luck, by endurance, by pity, not by merit. And in that moment I realized, they no longer saw me as a colleague, but as a survivor of a place I should never have ended up. The environment grew increasingly cold. They gave me lesser tasks, took away responsibilities, even moved my desk. They put me next to the storage room, to facilitate the flow of documents. The same storage room where mold crept up the walls and the broken air conditioning made the air dense and stuffy. There, among old boxes and stacks of paper, I began to understand what exile within one's own work is. But the true humiliation was yet to come. Doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps through the cracks, through the sound of jokes not told to your face, through the pauses in the hallways, through the glances that look away when you enter the elevator. The worst part isn't when they speak, it's when they remain silent. Silence is the tribunal of those who have already condemned you without the right to a defense. And it was in this silence that something in me began to change. First it seemed just sadness, then it turned to anger, and then serenity. Because there's a kind of calm that arises when the soul understands it has nothing left to lose. It was in this calm that I began to observe, listen, and record. The same gaze they used to watch me I returned, only with intelligence. And that's when the story truly began to change. What they didn't know was that every slight, every laugh, every forgotten email would become part of something much bigger. Sometimes, revenge isn't born from a scream. It's born from a patient gaze, from a woman who learned to bide her time to reveal what she always knew. That power changes hands the exact moment the truth finds a witness. And I found mine. But do you know what happens when someone who has always been invisible decides to be seen? It was on a gray day, one of those days when the air seems heavier than it should be, that I realized how close I was to the limit. The clock read 8:12, and I'd already been interrupted 4 times by people pretending not to know my position, asking, "Who's in charge of the coffee?" Or if I could deliver mail upstairs. I, who'd been in charge of that department for over a decade, had been. Sometimes racism doesn't arrive screaming. It arrives in a suit, with a smile on its face and expensive perfume. It comes disguised as a joke, as an oversight, as a coincidence. The room was full. The sound of the keyboards was almost a symphony, and the chill of the air conditioning bit my fingers. Each touch was an attempt to maintain my composure, to hide how much the environment was already corroding me. When the new manager walked behind me and blurted out, "You're so calm, it must be something people your age do," something inside me cracked. His voice was polite, but his gaze told no lies. Behind the false courtesy, there was the pleasure of belittling me. It wasn't just me. I saw how they looked at the cleaning lady, the security guard, anyone with skin like mine. It was a kind of contempt that needed no words. Silence was enough. A silence that swallows, that suffocates. And the more you try to ignore it, the more it grows inside you. One afternoon, I was organizing reports when I overheard a conversation in the hallway. Two colleagues, the same ones who called me aunt with false intimacy, were laughing. One of them said, "I don't know how she can still stand it. If it were me, I'd have retired by now. She must be afraid she won't find anything else." The other replied, "Or maybe it's because the owner feels sorry for her." The laughter echoed like a knife through the air. I stood still, holding a sheet of paper that was now trembling between my fingers. It was at that moment that I realized that the worst kind of humiliation is the kind that disguises itself as compassion. It's when they make you believe they're helping you, when in reality they're pushing you to the ground. And there, in the middle of that freezing office, I decided I would never bow my head again. I continued working in silence. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It was a strategic silence. A silence that observes. I began to write down everything. Every comment, every meeting where I was ignored, every email I deflected. I learned to transform humiliation into a record, pain into proof. Over time, I realized something curious. When a woman like me stays silent, they think she's given up. But what they don't understand is that there's a huge difference between giving up and planning. Over the next few weeks, the atmosphere grew more tense. I wasn't smiling as much anymore, and it made them uncomfortable. That discomfort was a sign that something was changing. It was as if, for the first time, they were afraid. Not of me, but of losing the control they thought they had. One night at home, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and looked at my hands. Hands that had worked from an early age, that had raised children, that had held the world together without applause. I thought about how many times throughout my life, I'd been led to believe that humility was synonymous with submission. It wasn't. Humility is a quiet strength, and it was in it that I found courage. It was also during this period that I began to understand that my story wasn't just mine. There was something bigger behind it. A repetition that has been going on for generations. Black women who give everything and receive half. And that's why so many people choose to stay here, following each revelation, because deep down they know that this story speaks to all of us. The next morning I carried a flash drive in my pocket. Small, discreet, harmless. But inside it was something no one had imagined. And as I greeted each one with the same serenity as always, I felt my heart beat faster. Some stories don't change when you speak louder. They change when you choose to listen to the silence, and turn that silence into power. And my moment was getting closer and closer. That week, the air inside the company felt heavier, as if the walls themselves breathed distrust. I could feel the gazes following me through the hallways. Long, lingering, feigning neutrality. There was something different about the way they greeted me. Too polite, too forced. The kind of politeness born of fear. And fear, I learned, is always a sign that the truth is about to reveal itself. The flash drive was still with me, in my blazer pocket, next to the badge I'd worn for so many years. A small, almost invisible object, but it carried within it everything they'd tried to erase. The conversations, the messages, the audio recordings, the meetings they'd unknowingly recorded. Every humiliation transformed into an archive. Every injustice saved in silence. I walked calmly, but inside it was as if I were holding a grenade ready to explode. I remember the smell of the manager's expensive perfume, mixed with the sweet aroma of hand sanitizer that filled the office. The click of heels on the tiled floor, the suppressed laughter, the tension disguised as normality. It was a scene of appearances, and I've always been good at seeing through them. That's what kept me going for so many years there. The ability to smile when they wanted me to break down. But that morning, as I typed reports that no longer mattered, I realized something curious. The calm that was taking hold of me wasn't that of revenge, but of justice. The difference is subtle, but essential. Revenge is born of anger. Justice, of lucidity. and I was lucid as never before. The dilemma that consumed me was silent. Part of me simply wanted to leave everything behind, and start over far away. But the other part, the one that carries the memory of those who came before, knew that silence this time would be complicity. I owed something to myself. And to those who, like me, were erased from meeting rooms, from team photos, from success stories. It was then that an unexpected meeting was scheduled. The company owner, who rarely showed up, announced that he would be stopping by that afternoon for an internal evaluation. The buzz began early, and people were rushing around nervously. I remained in my corner, observing. When he entered, the atmosphere changed. Everyone straightened, smiled, and changed their tone of voice. I greeted him respectfully, the same respect he always gave me, discreet, distant, but genuine. He looked at me for a moment longer than usual, and something in his gaze made me understand that fate had already chosen the moment. When the meeting began, I knew the tables were about to turn. The manager, with her false charisma, began to lecture about productivity, commitment, and organizational climate. She spoke beautifully, as if rehearsing in front of a mirror. But the owner watched her silently, resting his chin on his hands, too attentive. Then he turned to me and asked, "Do you have anything to add, Mrs. Selina?" The air seemed to drain from the room. I felt all eyes on me, waiting for the fall, the stumble, the embarrassment. I took a deep breath. And with the same serenity with which I prepared that flash drive, I simply said, "Yes, I do. But I think it's better to show than to tell." The manager tried to laugh nervously. The owner arched an eyebrow. And that was when I opened my laptop, plugged in the small flash drive, and let the sound of truth fill the room. Voices began to emerge from the speakers. Audio they hadn't imagined anyone had saved. Laughter, comments, insults disguised as jokes. "Old, stubborn. You should be grateful you're still here." The silence that fell was brutal. Her face paled. Some tried to hide their shock. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just looked at each of them in silence. Because at that moment, there was nothing more to explain. The weight of the years, of the humiliations, of the laughter, was all there between those white walls. But for the first time, not on my shoulders, on theirs. And when the company owner stood up, the sound of the chair scraping seemed to announce what was to come. But what he said next, no one was prepared to hear. The silence that followed was almost physical. I could hear the sound of air being exhaled carefully, as if everyone was afraid to break that moment. The company owner remained standing, motionless, looking at me and then back at the screen. The recorded voices still echoed in my head, mixed with the distant sound of the clock ticking away. The manager, once so confident, now kept her eyes lowered, her face drained of color. There was something almost poetic in that reversal. The same people who had laughed at me were now reaching for the ground, trying to escape their own reflection. He took a moment to speak. He walked slowly to the center of the room, rested his hands on the table, and said in a firm voice, "I heard every word. And it won't stay that way." It was the first time in so many years that I felt someone saw me completely. Not as the usual employee, not as the invisible woman in the back room, but as a presence, as someone whose pain finally made enough noise to penetrate walls. As he spoke, I noticed how the afternoon sun invaded the space, casting patches of light across the floor. Seemed symbolic. That beam illuminated my side of the table, as if time itself had decided to reveal which side held the truth. The others looked away. Some tried to compose themselves, straightening papers, coughing softly, pretending none of it affected them. But I saw it. I saw the shame in their trembling hands, the regret disguised in the rush to gather things. When the meeting ended, the owner approached me. There was no rush in his gesture, just a silent respect. He placed his hand on the back of the chair and said, almost confessionally, "I should have realized it sooner. Sometimes power blinds us." Those words echoed within me for days. Because it wasn't just about justice. It was about something bigger. It was about recognizing a humanity that had so often been denied. I left the office that day without looking back. The hallway felt different. My footsteps, once heavy, now sounded light, almost musical. The click of my heels echoed like a reminder of everything I'd resisted. In the elevator door, the glass reflected my face. And for the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw. There are wounds that don't heal with apologies. They heal with dignity. And dignity is the kind of thing no one can give you or take away. In the days that followed, the messages began to arrive. Old colleagues, people I'd never even imagined, confessed that they'd seen what I was going through but kept quiet out of fear. I read each one with serenity. There was no anger, just a kind of melancholy peace, like someone who understands that truth has its own pace of emergence. And it is at this point in history that many feel the urge to support this journey, leaving a silent sign that the message has touched them, perhaps because they recognize something of themselves in this journey. I returned to the company a week later, not as an employee, but as a guest. The owner had called me in for a special meeting. The atmosphere was different. The smiles were now sincere, if shy. The old manager was no longer there. In her place, a young black woman with a firm gaze and a calm voice was presenting new projects. As I watched, I realized something bigger had happened. Justice hadn't just freed me, it had opened space for others to breathe as well. At the end of the meeting, the owner thanked me publicly. He said that some truths only come to light when someone has the courage to speak them. I just smiled, because deep down I knew that courage was never the problem. The problem was how much the world tried to make us doubt it. When I stepped outside, the wind outside felt different. Lighter, more real. The kind of wind that comes after a storm when the air finally clears. But deep down I knew this story wasn't over yet. What came next would change more than just me. It would change the very way that place would remember my name. For days, the echo of that meeting lingered in my mind. It was as if every sound, every look, every pause still lived within me. Sometimes, while making coffee in the morning, I'd catch myself remembering her expression. The manager's, the moment her own words came back to haunt her. There was no shouting, no excited audience. Just the weight of truth, descending on the room like a thick curtain of reality. But what surprised me most wasn't her fall, but what came after. The change wasn't loud. It happened in details. In the way people began to look at me, now with a respect they'd previously denied. In the care with which they pronounced my name, as if they finally understood that it carried history, memory, struggle. It was strange and beautiful to realize that something invisible had shifted. One afternoon, returning for a brief visit, I noticed they'd changed the sign in the main room. The new slogan read, "Here, every voice matters." I smiled to myself. I knew those words wouldn't have happened without my calculated silence. There are ironies that fate writes with elegance. But even with this sense of victory, something inside me remained restless. Perhaps because I knew that true transformation doesn't happen overnight. Even though the air seemed lighter, the fear still lingered. That ancient, inherited fear that whispers that everything could go back to the way it was. Fear of being erased again, of seeing justice undone, of realizing that the world only changes on the surface. And yet, alongside this fear, there was a stubborn hope. A small but firm flame. The hope that my story could serve as a mirror for other women. That they would understand that dignity doesn't need to ask permission to exist. That silence, when born of strength, can scream louder than any insult. I remember the day I received a message from a former colleague. It said, "Thank you. After what happened, I found the courage to report what was done to me." I read it with tears in my eyes. Because I realized that moral revenge isn't about destroying the other, but about bringing light back to what they tried to erase. Time passed, and the company began to truly change. I saw new faces emerging, faces similar to mine. I saw talents being recognized, doors opening, projects being signed by hands that previously weren't even invited in. It was like watching an old house being rebuilt, brick by brick, with patience and truth. But within the walls of that transformation, shadows still lingered. People who feigned support but murmured behind the scenes. People who thrived on the discomfort of seeing a black woman occupy a space that, for them, had always been owned. The difference was that now I didn't shrink from it. I saw it, I felt it, and I remained. One day the owner called me in for a private chat. He was different. His expression was lighter, his gaze more human. He said he wanted to ask me a favor: help create a new internal diversity program. He spoke sincerely, but also with a certain weight, perhaps guilt. I accepted, but imposed one condition. I didn't want it to be symbolic. I wanted it to be real. That night when I got home, I sat on the couch and stared out the window. The street was silent, lit by a huge moon. I thought about how many times I'd returned from that same place tired, feeling like everything was in vain. And now, somehow, fate had cast me in the opposite role. Not just a victim, but an agent of change. That's when I realized something that gave me goosebumps. Power isn't in screaming when they hurt you, but in standing tall when they expect you to fall. Still, something inside me told me the story wasn't over. That there was a missing piece, something I hadn't yet fully grasped. And this feeling began to grow like a whisper deep in my chest. The premonition that, even when we think we've won, fate always has one last card to deal. In the days that followed, I realized that peace can also be frightening. After so long on high alert, the calm felt like a trap. I would wake up early, drink my coffee while looking out the window, and yet I felt something throbbing in the back of my mind. A mixture of vigilance and distrust, as if the past still lurked, waiting for a careless oversight to come back to bite me. It was strange to live with the silence after years of hearing whispers and laughter behind my back. With each visit to the company, I noticed small signs of transformation. The new manager, the young black woman who now held the position, welcomed me with a smile that seemed to carry the weight of many stories before hers. There was a firmness in her gaze that moved me. It was like seeing myself in another time, before the wounds, before the disbelief. And this made me think that perhaps the greatest victory was not in exposing injustice, but in opening a door that had so often been closed to me. But even with this sense of purpose, I knew the path to change wasn't linear. One rainy afternoon, when I returned to pick up some documents, I ran into two old colleagues in the hallway. They fell silent as soon as they saw me. The same look that had once belittled me was now hidden. There were no more insults, but there was discomfort. It hit me in an unexpected way. Because I understood that respect earned through fear is only a shadow of true respect. As I waited for the elevator, I saw my reflection in the metal doors. My gray hair was elegantly pinned back, my expression serene, but my eyes, oh my eyes, still held a trace of weariness. Not the weariness of my body, but of my soul, which fought for dignity every day. That reflection seemed to ask me, "And now, what will you do with the power you hold in your hands?" On the way home, the rain grew heavier. The drops hit the car window like little drums, and the sound took me back to the beginning. I remembered when I joined that company so many years ago, afraid of making mistakes, always trying to be twice as good to be seen as half as good. I remembered the first dirty look, the first joke disguised as kindness, and I thought about how all of that somehow shaped me. The fear was still there, but it no longer ruled me. I watched it like someone I'd watch an old acquaintance, someone who once made me tremble but now has no power. Over time, I began to realize that something bigger was happening inside me. It was as if an old part, hardened by pain, was slowly dissolving. The resentment was losing its strength, and in its place was born a quiet lucidity. I understood that true revenge wasn't public exposure, nor belated applause. It was the freedom to no longer carry the weight of hatred. Still, there was something in the air that unsettled me. An email that wouldn't open, a conversation interrupted as I walked by, a glance exchanged too quickly between two directors. Details, small but constant. It was as if the shadow of everything that had happened still refused to fade. That night, as I prepared dinner, I felt that sense of wakefulness again. The sound of oil in the pan, the smell of garlic browning, the distant rumble of thunder, everything seemed to carry an omen. I set the plate on the table and stared into space, trying to understand where that restlessness was coming from. And then I realized, the fight doesn't end when justice is served, just changes form. Now the challenge was different, to maintain what I'd achieved without losing my way. To not let the wound become my identity. To not let the past define who I would be from then on. The rain continued outside, and I watched the drops run down the glass as if drawing the weather. There was something hypnotic about it, a sad but real beauty. It was as if the world was reminding me that light and shadow never separate completely. They just learn to coexist. And in that moment I felt something new approaching. Something that didn't yet have a name, but that promised to change everything once again. In the following days, I began to notice how time seemed to rearrange itself around me. People began to treat me with a mixture of respect and caution, as if my presence carried a weight they couldn't yet measure. First, this bothered me. I didn't want to be the ghost reminding others of what they'd done. But gradually, I realized that this collective discomfort was also a form of transformation. It was the silence of learning, the kind of silence that precedes recognition. The new internal policy began to bear fruit. Projects forgotten for years returned to the agenda. Ideas that had previously been ignored began to be heard. I saw young employees, especially Black women, stand up in meetings with unprecedented courage. It was as if my story had opened a crack in the fear. Small, but enough to let the light in. And deep down, I knew that each of them carried within them a version of what I had experienced. The struggle to be seen, the desire to be heard without having to shout. One afternoon, I was invited to speak at an internal event about ethics and respect. I stepped onto the stage with trembling hands but a calm heart. I looked out at the audience and saw so many attentive faces, a mix of old colleagues and new employees. I recounted my journey without accusing anyone. I spoke of what hurts but also of what heals. Of the power of standing firm even when the ground disappears. And as I spoke, I noticed something I'd never noticed before. People's fear turning into reflection. It was like watching ice melt, slowly but inevitably. After the talk, I received dozens of messages. Some came from those who had previously pretended not to see me. Others came from young people who said they felt inspired not to bow their heads. I read each of them with a mixture of pride and serenity. I understood that pain, when expressed with dignity, has the power to build bridges. But not everyone reacted with humility. Amid so many changes, some still tried to sabotage the process. A misplaced report here, an omitted piece of information there. The subtle resistance of those fearing the loss of privileges. But this time I didn't hold back. I observed, recorded, and acted calmly. Time has taught me that you don't win by shouting. You win by documenting, revealing at the right moment. And that moment arrived when the company owner decided to conduct a full audit. He wanted to review every department, understand where ethical lapses still existed. I was called in to oversee part of the process. And amidst the reports, a disconcerting truth emerged. One of the oldest directors, the one who always tried to discredit me, was involved in an internal scheme to manipulate results and favor acquaintances. Ironically, while he tried to silence my voice, he was also paving the way for his own downfall. The owner looked at me differently that day. There was no pity, no forced admiration, there was respect. A silent but complete respect. He asked me for help rebuilding that department. And for the first time, I felt the company saw me not as a survivor, but as a leader. That night, alone at home, I sat at the table and stared at my hands. They were the same hands that had once trembled with anger and helplessness. Now firm, sure, shaped by everything they had endured. I thought about how life tests us, and how, sometimes, the payoff comes not in the form of applause, but in quiet justice. The city slept outside, and I felt the light weight of a mature victory, one that doesn't need to be flaunted. It was strange to think that the same place where I'd been humiliated was now asking me for help rebuilding itself. As if fate had decided to slowly hand me back everything they'd tried to take from me. And it's curious how, when we share stories like this, some people recognize themselves in them. Others question themselves. Some even feel a good unease, the kind that awakens awareness. Perhaps that's why, whenever someone hears this kind of story, they feel the urge to share what they've also experienced. And if you, who are here now, have ever felt something similar, perhaps you'll understand what I mean. Because certain wounds don't serve to stop us, they serve to teach us where we should never bleed again. But even with all this, something still moved on the horizon. A small, almost imperceptible detail told me that this story still held one final outcome, and that it was closer than I could have imagined. In the week following the audit, the mood within the company changed almost imperceptibly, but I could feel it. The air seemed lighter, but there was still something subterranean, a subtle tension like the hiss of a power line about to snap. People smiled more, but their gazes were still measured. There was pride, yes, but also fear. Because every time the truth comes out, it doesn't just bring justice, it brings consequences. The departed director became a ghost that haunted the hallways even in his absence. No one spoke his name aloud, but he was present in every conversation, lingering in the air like dust after a demolition. And I observed it all with a serenity that surprised me. That chaos that had once intimidated me now seemed part of a natural cycle. Destruction and reconstruction. I realized that sometimes, what seems like ruin is just the ground being prepared for something new to grow. But it wasn't just inside the company that changes were happening. Outside, something was also transforming within me. I began walking alone after work, just to hear my own footsteps, feel the wind on my face, see the city in a different light. At every turn, I found myself revisiting old versions of myself. The woman who swallowed insults, who doubted her own strength, who mistook humility for silence. All of them still lived within me, but now they seemed to watch from afar as if to say, "Finally, you've chosen yourself." It was on one of these walks that I received an unexpected call. It was the owner of the company. His voice sounded different, more restrained, almost vulnerable. He said he wanted to thank me personally and that he intended to include me on a new advisory board. "We need people who know what it means to resist," he said. And for the first time, I understood that my pain had become a reference. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the armchair, a cup of tea in my hands, watching the steam rise and disappear into the air. I thought about everything that had brought me there. The humiliations, the long hours pretending not to see, the tears hidden in the bathroom, the days I considered giving up. And I realized that pain also teaches, but silently and mercilessly. Teaches us to see what truly matters, to recognize who we are when no one else sees us. But even with this clarity, something was making me uneasy. There was a strange feeling that not everyone would accept this new order. Power, when shaken, reacts. And I knew that some had not yet given up on seeing me fall. Small gestures began to alert me. Reports that took longer than usual, meetings scheduled without my knowledge, messages that didn't reach me. Nothing explicit, just enough to test my patience. I observed everything silently, without confrontation. I had already learned that, in certain games, winning means taking your time. Time is a cruel but fair ally. One morning, arriving early, I saw a forgotten folder on the boardroom desk. Inside were old documents, dubious signatures, transactions dating back to a period before the audit. Something told me the file wasn't there by chance. It was a trap or an invitation. I hesitated for a moment. I could simply ignore it, pretend I hadn't seen it. But my conscience wouldn't allow it. I took a deep breath and closed the folder, committing the image of each page to memory. In the days that followed, the tension grew again. The same environment that had previously seemed to me to be in flux now pulsed with an unstable energy, as if the truth, once released, demanded more than we were willing to give. And deep down I knew, every change has a price. One night on my way home, I noticed a car parked across the street. The headlights were off, the engine was off. For a second I thought I was imagining things. But the same car was there again the next night. The same model, the same color. The old fear, the one I thought I'd overcome, returned, subtly but very real. The difference was that this time, I didn't let it paralyze me. I closed the curtains, made some tea, and sat in silence. The sound of the clock filled the house, marking each second with precision. And as time passed, I realized the story wasn't over yet. That perhaps the truth I thought I'd revealed was just the surface of something much deeper, something still waiting for the right moment to emerge. That night, the silence in the house seemed heavier than usual. Every sound seemed amplified. The creak of the wood on the floor, the wind rushing through the cracks in the windows, the ticking of the clock on the wall. It was as if time itself had stopped to observe what I would do next. The car was still across the street. The same one, motionless, discreet like a patient shadow. And for the first time in a long time, I felt again that familiar chill when life seems on the verge of revealing something you can no longer hide. I didn't sleep. I stayed in the living room, watching the reflection of the streetlights in the window. Sometimes we think we've overcome fear, but it always finds a way to return, disguised, more subtle, more clever. And there alone, I realized that perhaps the real challenge wasn't what they'd done to me, but what I would do with everything I had left. The power to transform pain into action requires more courage than facing injustice itself. The next morning I arrived at work early. The hallway seemed longer than ever, the lights still dim, the distant sound of printers waking the building. On my desk, a new folder, identical to the one I'd seen days before. This time there was no doubt. Someone wanted me to find it. The weight of that simple object, sheets, staples, names, seemed disproportionate. It was a new piece in the same game, perhaps an attempt to silence me, perhaps a warning. I opened the folder carefully. What I saw took my breath away. Documents proving a long-standing scheme, larger than anyone imagined. Transfers signed by someone who, until then, had been considered untouchable. The name of the company's owner himself appeared on some pages. For a moment, I felt the ground give way. Everything I thought I had uncovered seemed only the visible layer of a much deeper labyrinth. I left the room and walked to the terrace, trying to catch my breath. The cold morning air hit my face, and for a moment, I felt small before the immensity of the city. Every lit window, every building in the distance, seemed to hide a story like mine. People trying to survive in systems that swallow them, struggling to maintain integrity amidst power. I thought about how many times I had closed my eyes to avoid seeing too much. How many times I had chosen silence to continue existing. Now, silence was no longer a refuge. It was a responsibility. I kept the documents with me and spent the rest of the day observing them. Every gesture, every look, every word spoken in the elevator or in meetings seemed to carry a new layer of meaning. No one knew I'd seen it, but everyone seemed to sense something had changed. Power changes hands without needing an announcement. When I got home, I closed the curtains and sat down at the table again. The cup of tea cooled beside me, untouched. I picked up my cell phone and checked the number of the company owner. The same one who, weeks before, had thanked me for my loyalty. I wondered if he was the one leaving the folders on my desk. If I was testing myself or warning myself. The doubt was a constant, nagging presence, like a buzzing in the back of my head. As the night wore on, I began to sense something bigger was afoot. This story, which seemed justly concluded, was perhaps just the beginning of another revelation. And deep down I knew I had only two choices: pretend I hadn't seen it and preserve the peace I'd achieved, or plunge back into chaos, this time for something beyond my own story. I looked at the walls of the house, lit only by the reflection of the lamp. There were old photos. Me younger in my company uniform, my gaze full of hope. How many times had that same gaze believed in empty promises? How many times had my faith in fair work betrayed me? I took a deep breath and closed my eyes. The memory of the humiliation still hurt, but now it had become a compass. Each scar told me exactly what not to tolerate. And perhaps that was the purpose of it all, to transform pain into direction. Inside, the car was still parked. The engine was running this time, emitting a low, almost inaudible sound. I stood still, watching through the curtain. The shadow inside the car didn't move. For a moment I felt my heart race, not with fear but with certainty. The story wasn't over yet, and I, who had once been the target, was now at the center of the game. Something was about to happen, and I knew it. The truth, once again, would come knocking on my door. That early morning, the sound of the engine idling in front of my house seemed to pulse inside my chest. For a moment, past and present blurred together. The fear of before, the courage of now. I waited. The clock struck 3:12. When the car finally moved and disappeared around the corner, I understood. Certain presences don't need a face to reveal intentions. What remained was silence, dense and absolute, the same that precedes great decisions. I went to the window and saw my reflection blended into the darkness of the glass. The face staring back at me was no longer that of the humiliated woman, nor that of the employee constantly begging for permission to exist. It was that of someone who finally understood the price of freedom. And it's curious how truth has a way of stripping us of everything we are not. Roles, positions, appearances, until only what is non-negotiable remains, our own conscience. In the days that followed, I acted calmly. I saved the documents, organized copies, and traced connections. Every detail revealed a pattern. Every repeated signature told a story. Corruption wasn't new. It had simply learned to dress better. I could have revealed everything at once, exposed the names, and caused a storm. But I learned that justice, to be true, must mature. While I waited for the right moment, I continued working. The curious glances, the whispers in the hallway, the emails that lingered in the air. None of it affected me anymore. I had seen too much to fear small shadows. And somehow everyone knew. Attitude changes when fear changes hands. The company owner called me into a meeting. He looked different, dejected, almost frail. He said he'd heard rumors that something bigger might be coming to light, and asked if I knew anything. I stared at him in silence for a few seconds. His gaze wavered, like someone feeling the weight of their own mask. Then I calmly replied, "Sometimes silence is the only way to let the truth reveal itself." I left the room without looking back. For the first time, I felt I no longer needed proof. Time would do what I didn't need to do. And it did. A few weeks later, the news spread. The case reached the press through an anonymous tip. External audits, investigations, and dismissals ensued. The company made headlines, and with it, the empire of silence that sustained it. No one knew who had sent the documents, but those who needed to know did. I was summoned privately by a new steering committee. The tone was respectful, almost reverent. They wanted me to stay, to help rebuild what had been destroyed. I agreed, but made it clear. Dignity cannot be built where fear still exists. And that was how, without shouting or explicit revenge, I found my justice. One afternoon after everything, I returned to the terrace where, months before, I had sought air to bear the weight of what I had discovered. The sun was setting, gilding the buildings, and the wind carried the distant sounds of the city. Horns, voices, life. I closed my eyes and felt a peace I had never felt before. It was as if every old tear had been transformed into light. I thought of all the women who've kept quiet out of fear, of all the days when silence was mistaken for weakness. But silence can also be a strategy. Sometimes it's in silence that the strength that changes everything is born. And now, looking back, I realize that the humiliation that tried to destroy me was the seed of my liberation. Because the power to rise again lies not in what others do to us, but in what we choose to do with what's left. If this story reached you, perhaps it's no coincidence. Perhaps you too have something hidden, something the world hasn't yet acknowledged. And if so, leave a silent sign that you still believe in the power of truth. Share what this journey has awakened in you. Because stories like this don't live alone. They resonate with those who need to hear them. Today, when I walk the same corridors where I was once diminished, I realize that victory lies not in being applauded, but in not bowing. Revenge wasn't destruction, it was transformation. And it's with this kind of strength that a new beginning is built. Because in the end, justice isn't watching someone else fall. It's seeing yourself standing tall, whole after all.